Shalom from Israel, and welcome to our Torah for the Nations weekly meeting. This week we titled this Good for You, and you'll hear me say good for you about 5 times during the night. And you know, there's different ways that you can say good for you. You can be sarcastic and you can say, oh, good for you. Or you can be very sincere and say, wow, good for you, kol hakavod, mazel tov. Or you could say, this is not good for you. Like, you know, it's not good for the man to be alone. This is not good for you. Or you could say, what's good for you is good for me. Kind of like, you know, we know that we can sum up the whole Torah with that, I forgot this wasn't plugged in. Hold on. Okay. Don't do to anyone else what you would not want done to you, right? So what's good for you is good for me. What's not good for you is not good for me. It's measure for measure. So this is kind of a connecting theme through all the things that we're going to talk about tonight. First of all, there was a article by, it's called To See and Not to See by Shaul Werthemeyer. All right, so we are in Parshat Noach, and he says, in this week's Torah portion, we read of the flood of Noah. In chapter 9, there is an account of how Noah planted a vineyard, and when he came out of the ark, he drank wine, he became intoxicated, and shamefully uncovered himself inside his tent. So one of the things that we always do when we look at these Torah portions is we always want to say, well, what does this have to do with me? Or what am I going to take away from this that I can apply to my life? So we have this incident where someone has done something shameful. And we know that nothing happens by accident. And so it's not an accident that Noah's son Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness and told it to his 2 brothers outside. So Ham comes in and sees this shameful act of his father. And it says the first thing he did is go talk about him. Okay? Then it says what the other 2 brothers do. Shem and Japheth took a garment, placed it on their shoulders, and then they walked into the tent backwards and covered their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned backwards, so they did not see their father's nakedness. So he says the Torah is extremely precise. If the verse already told us that Noah's sons Shem and Japheth walked backwards, then why does it also state that they did not see their father's nakedness? Isn't that obvious? If they walked backwards, of course they didn't see him. So the answer is, not only did they not physically see Noah's nakedness, but they did not focus on his shameful conduct. Rather, they took steps to help him and correct the situation. Ham, however, saw his father's nakedness, and not only did he not do anything to help, but he reveled in Noah's shortcoming and rushed to tell his brothers. So the Baal Shem Tov says, he taught that other people are like mirrors to us. Okay, so this is really a takeaway from this story for us. In other words, if another person appears dirty, it is merely a reflection of your own state. However, there can be another purpose to recognizing shortcomings in another person. We must take note of how we react. We're going to find out that when things are going on with other people, it's not a coincidence that these people are in our lives. It's not a coincidence that we see them doing this act. And the first thing we should think is what is God telling me? Because this is a mirror for me, a message for me and what I'm doing. He says, if we see another's quote-unquote nakedness and focus on the flaw more than is necessary to help the person, we can be certain that in our perception is a message from above that we share the same flaw. Okay? Rest assured, however, that if we take action to remedy the situation and help the other person, this is certainly the reason that the Creator put us in the position to notice the other person's flaw. And he says, and the last thing is, it's a delicate balancing act to see without seeing, to be sensitive enough to see the faults and deficiencies of other people, but without focusing on the faults, focusing only on what we need to, focusing only on what needs to be done to help them. So this is a good way for me to see myself. When I see a flaw in someone else, I have to say, why am I seeing this? Why is this in my life? Is there a mirror going on? I should be thinking not really about that person as much as I should be thinking, why does this bother me so much about that person? Is God speaking to me? That's one thing. That this is, good for me to see this. And we also want to say, what can I do to help? What is good for you? Not for me to go talk about you, not to revel in your shamefulness, but to do what the other two brothers, Shem and Japheth, did. They didn't see their father's nakedness. They said, okay, what needs to be done? Let's just cover him with a blanket. Okay, so that's one of the takeaways from that part of our parsha. And now we're going to look in Genesis chapter 9, and we're going to see that it says that God blessed Noah and his sons, and he said to them, may you be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So he gives them this command. Creation has started over. And then you see the next thing after that, Noah is going over, it looks like the Noahide laws. He's telling them every thing they should eat and not eat, and he mentions about do not murder. Okay, and so then we have that incident that we just talked about. And then we get to chapter 10. And we're seeing all of these names. We're seeing all the offsprings of Japheth, all the offsprings of Ham, and all the offspring of Shem. And each time you're going to see 4 times there's the same sentence. So it, obviously it's there to get our attention. So it talks about these are the sons of Japheth, and it says they were dispersed into the islands of the nations in their various lands, each one with its own language, according to their local and national identity. Okay, then we have the sons of Ham, and it says it again. The above are the descendants of Ham, according to their families, their languages, their lands, and their nations. Okay, we go on. The above are the sons of Shem, according to their families, their languages, their lands, and their nations. And then finally, the last sentence in chapter 10 is, the above are the families of the sons of Noah, according to their generations by their nations. From them the nations were dispersed on the earth after the flood. Okay, so I was looking at this article called The Tower of Babel and the Birth of Nationhood by Daniel Gordis. Because right after we have this story, Noah and his 3 sons doing what God told them to do, like go, scatter, have different languages, have diversity, okay? It's happening, and then there's this weird story. And he says this Tower of Babel story is a political story, and it's a criticism of man's folly and presumption. It's a report of human failure followed by a story of Abraham. So what we're going to do is we're going to get a story of this is not good for you versus here's what you need to do that's good for you. Okay? It said this story is a warning against man's eagerness to achieve uniformity. Okay? All the bricks were, all the same, everybody's speaking the same, everybody's doing the same. It says everyone on the earth, everyone on the whole earth, all of a sudden, we go from chapter 10 where everybody's got their own language, their own nation, and all of a sudden in chapter 11, you have to say, what happened to disrupt the natural process of human development? And then we get a little clue when we look at Ham's descendants. It says that Ham was the father of Cush, was the father of Nimrod. And that's in chapter 10. And it says about Nimrod, he was the first man of might on the earth, almighty hunter before the Lord. And in this article it says the world's first imperialist. And imperialism is a forceful bringing of different peoples under a common regime. So this thing, same language and same words, it's imperialistic words, and its attempt to artificially hold humanity together. So they have this unity, but it's an artificial, man-made unity. Dispersion, on the other hand, this go and scatter and separate and become, have diversity. Dispersion is part of a divine plan. This is what is good for us. Own your land, your language, be separate and distinct nations. This is how human beings fully realize their own unique potential. And this is the way things were going until Nimrod came along. So what was the sin of the Tower of Babel? Uniformity was the sin that had to be stopped. So when we read that God came and broke down their speech, and so they couldn't communicate, it says breaking down their speech was not so much a punishment, but a solution to the problem. And God was saying, this is not good for you. So God confused the languages, causing humanity to scatter over the earth. And that was the original plan. We're just coming right back to the original intention. So God's objective, this branching out of mankind into distinct peoples, now it's been accomplished. Humanity is back on track. So here's how we sum up this story. It says, thus far, the following progression. We had the flood. Nationhood is introduced. Humanity begins to disperse into distinct peoples, each with its own lineage, land, language. This is a natural process, but the natural process is interrupted by a sharp U-turn toward homogeneity, sameness. Dispersion is then resumed. Linguistic variety, geographical diversity, human beings once again scattered over the face of the earth. So what did we learn from this story? God likes human freedom, self-realization, multiplicity, and diversity. And this is political wisdom right there in our Hebrew Bible. This is what is good. It says human beings naturally differ from one another, and so must form distinct settings for the search of the good life. This is what's good for you. Diversity is good. Each nation with its own identity, culture, land, language, heritage, and destiny can provide humankind with the conditions it needs to prosper and thrive. So we have this kind of failure story of the Tower of Babel, and God comes and gets things back on track. And then when we get to the very last 6 verses of our Parsha, we're going to be introduced to Tarak. It says the descendants of Tarak. So here's the story of Tarak. Tarak is one of the descendants. He's about 8 generations down in Shem, in the line of Shem. So Tarak has 3 sons. Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran dies. So Haran dies young, and he leaves 3 orphans. He leaves a son and 2 daughters. And so what the 2 surviving brothers do, what Abram and Nahor do, is they each marry one of their dead brother's daughters. And this is, the idea is to keep his memory alive. And so Abraham marries Sarah, and Nahor marries Milcah, and Abraham also takes on Lot, his brother's son. Okay? So then we have this statement that says, Sarah was barren. She has no child. So why would we need to know that? Well, the whole purpose of Abraham and Sarah getting married was to keep their brother's memory alive. And then it says that she's barren. Of course, we know the story later is she is given a child. But at this point, anyway, we see this contrast by the story that we just came out of, this Tower of Babel. You see a lot of imperialism, you see narcissism, let's make a name for ourselves. And then you have this opposite story. You have this little family, and you have this loving kindness going on, like, let's keep our brother's memory alive. And the way that they do it is they each marry one of his children. Okay, so then the next thing that happens is the father, Tarak, and Abraham and Sarah and Lot all go on a journey, and they're on their way. It says they're on their way to go to the land of Canaan. But they reached as far as Haran and settled there. Okay? And Tarak lived a total of 205 years, and then he died in Haran. And so we're going to see next week how the story picks up. And from this point on, everything is going to zoom in on this family, Abraham and Sarah and their family. And God is going to show us, compared to what not to do, like this imperialistic, forced, fake unity, artificial unity. He's going to show, using the family of Abraham and Sarah, and how they just teach their children, and they very organically grow into a nation. Okay, and this is what God wants. Okay, and so we have, I'm going to talk about the month that we've entered, the month of Heshvan. And we know, you've probably heard me say before, that each month has certain energies, right? And they each have a tribe. And last month was Tishrei, and it was the tribe of Ephraim, and then all those holidays that we had in Tishrei. Then next month coming up is Kislev, and that's the month of Benjamin, and we're going to have Hanukkah. But here we are right now. We have just entered into the month of Heshvan, and there's no holidays. And the tribe for this month is Manasseh. And we have a prayer that we say, that we bless our daughters to be like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. And we bless our sons to be like Ephraim and Manasseh. So when you think about, of all the groups of brothers that you read in the whole book of Genesis, you can see why you wouldn't say, I want you to be like Cain and Abel. I want you to be like Ishmael and Isaac. I want you to be like Jacob and Esau. I want you to be like Joseph and his brothers. Because we know those stories. There's a lot of jealousy. There's a lot of discord. But finally, we get to Joseph's two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And we say, could you please be like Ephraim and Manasseh? Because there's no jealousy. They are close. And a couple of weeks ago, I was at a Shabbat table, and a friend of mine, she told me that her father had asked her and her sister and her brother, the three of them, before he died, he said, I want you all to get along. Don't fight. It was very important to him that his kids did not fight. And so she really took that to heart. And every week they do a 3-way Skype call. And they make it happen. They live in different parts of the world, all three of them. They're all three very different people, but they're honoring their father. There's nothing that makes a parent more happy to know that his children get along. And so finally, I want to talk about Ephraim and Manasseh, but especially Manasseh, because this month of Heshvan, we have this energy of Manasseh. So what is it that we need to learn from Manasseh? We know that when their grandfather Jacob came and was giving out the blessings, even though Manasseh was older, Ephraim got the blessing from Jacob's right hand, and the left hand went on Manasseh. And Joseph was a little confused. He's like, well, no, wait, Manasseh is my firstborn. But Jacob was prophetic, and Jacob could see into the future that Ephraim's tribe was actually going to be greater than Manasseh's. And one of Ephraim's descendants is Joshua. And of course, we know Joshua was great. He was the next leader after Moses. And one of Manasseh's descendants was Gideon. And Gideon was a judge, and Gideon was also great. But the potential was there. You know, we're talking about jealousy. And this, oh, good for you, said in kind of like a sarcastic way. the potential was there for Manasseh to be jealous for what his grandfather did with the blessings, but that never happened. So what we get from this month, the energy in this month, is from Manasseh, we get, don't be jealous, because there's always going to be somebody out there that is more talented than you, that is better looking than you, that has more money than you, that has a nicer car than you. Whatever it just is what it is. And he's telling us that for us to have that Manasseh inside of us, good for you, kol hakavod, mazel tov, a sincere good for you, like Manasseh was with his brother. He wasn't jealous of Ephraim. He was happy with his lot. He was happy with his brother's lot. So that's one of the messages of Heshvan that we need to work on. And the other thing is that when you look at their father Joseph and all the things that led up to the birth of these two sons, it's just like a string of tragedies. And we might find ourselves in a place that feels like, Joseph was thrown in the pit, Joseph was in prison. We might feel like we have taken a fall, we are in a setback time. But when you look, we know that we can't ever take an incident in isolation, because it's a string of events which finally led to, all of these tragedies in Joseph's life, being sold as a slave by his brothers, and then the famine. But then finally at the end, we see that he was able to save his family from starvation. He saved the whole Middle East from starvation. And what happens? He brings Ephraim and Manasseh into the world. And in one day, these two who are raised in Egypt, and all the only thing that they're getting from God is from their immediate family. They're just learning about God from Joseph. And so when Jacob comes, Jacob says, Ephraim and Manasseh are now part of the tribes. 2 more tribes get added, just like that in one day. And so those string of tragedies that happened in Joseph's life, look what happened. He got an Ephraim and a Manasseh. So that's another message for this month of Heshvan, that anything that you're going through right now, we have to remember that it's not the end of the story yet. And we have our emunah, we have faith in God. We know that, you think of someone, you always hear these stories about the ex-drug addict who recovered, and now he's helping people in recovery. So yes, that was a setback. Yes, that was a fall. That was a horrible time. But now look at all of the good. So you see, you can't judge one incident. You have to wait to see how the story unfolds. Same thing if someone has an illness, and then later they become a medical professional and they help others. And so that's what is the energy for the month of Heshvan that we're in right now, and the tribe of Manasseh, and his message to us, that Manasseh inside each of us. Okay, so we'll just do a little recap here of why we call this good for you. In the story of Noah and his sons, the thing was to say, when we see someone else in our life that is doing something, we have to think, this is good for me because it's a mirror for me to see myself. Maybe God put this person in my life for me to look at myself. It's certainly not to go and talk about the person or gloat or judge the person. And then we think, well, what can I do that is good for this person? What can I do to help? The other thing is that we learn about us individually and as humankind. What's good for us is not imperialism, forced unity or uniformity, but what is good for us, God loves diversity. Okay? And then it's good for us to be sincere when there's people around us that are doing better than us for whatever reason. Good for you. Kol hakavod, no jealousy, just a sincere good for you, mazel tov. And so that's what we need to remember this month of Heshvan, and to just take our setbacks in stride, And the letter for this month is Noon, and Noon can mean fish, and the fish kind of keep a low profile. And this is kind of a month of the low profile and not making any big decisions, because, you know, let's just ride this out and see how it goes. I listened to so many hours and hours of teachings on Heshvan, and so I'm just giving you like some of my favorite things. If you want to know more about all the energies that are in the month right now, if you Google Alona Nava, he's a teacher right here in Sfat. He has the Kabbalah of Heshvan by Alona Nava, and he talks like for an hour of all these really cool things about this month. You might want to do that. I just gave you some of my favorite things about Menashe. Okay, and I've got a lot of cool things planned in the Zoom room, so I hope you can join me in there. Have a great week. Bye for now.